Good morning and welcome to Decision Making in the Paddock, Webinar 3 of the 2020 Hunter Local Land Services Livestock Forum. My name is Teresa Hogan. I'm the Livestock Officer for Hunter Local Land Services in the Ag Extension team, and I will be today's moderator. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respect to elders past, present and future. We also recognise the unique, diverse and enduring cultures of the First Nations peoples of New South Wales. Today's webinar is coming to you live from our Facebook and YouTube platforms. To help us make this forum better for you and to give you the best experience possible, please ask questions in the chat function on the platform that you are using throughout the presentations. At the completion of the presentations today, we will move to a discussion panel where I will have the opportunity to pose your questions to our speakers. Please be patient. With all technology, there is a high chance that we will have technical difficulties throughout the presentations, and if that is the case, bear with us. We have a diligent team here working to get the sessions back to you as soon as possible. Our webinars are being recorded and will be available for you to look at any time in the future on our Hunter Local Land Services website and also on our YouTube channel. We have an excellent lineup of speakers today. We're fortunate enough to have Sarah Giblin from Hunter Local Land Services. We also have Nikki Henderson of Pinnacle Ag and David Dean from Hunter Local Land Services here today to present. And we will also have presentation videos from Tanya Hayes of SeedForce and Graham Creed, our ABC weatherman. To kick things off, we have a video from Graham Creed with the 3-month weather outlook.
Graham Creed here from the ABC with the latest information from the Bureau of Meteorology in the 3-month climate outlook. The expectation is still that we are going to see a wet end to winter and also spring. This time though, one thing has changed somewhat. The Indian Ocean water temperatures, although they are warmer than usual for this time of year, they're no longer expected to become a major influence on rainfall for the continent. Instead, it's the Pacific Ocean that's going to lead to the heaviest of the falls and the more widespread rainfall as we move through August and into spring. Now, this is due to an expectation of a La Nina developing. We can see that with the rainfall expectations over the next 3 months. For most of the Hunter, we are looking at really quite a positive outlook as far as rainfall. This is the above mean falls. If we take a closer look though at the potential for that same time period on this next map, this is basically the chance of at least 100 millimetres of rain falling over that 3-month period. We can see by the blue across the Hunter that we are looking again at quite a good potential of some falls well in excess of 100 millimetres through most of the region. So some decent rainfall totals with that. Now, with all this rainfall, temperatures are also going to be a feature. The expectation for both the maximum and the minimum temperatures is that they will be well above average. So this is the minimums. That means frost less likely as we move through the remainder of winter and early spring. It doesn't mean we won't get any, but it just means that the wetter soil and also the potential of cloudy conditions, higher humidity, we'll start to see that frost ease off fairly quickly. The maximum temperatures following a similar trend. They're expected to be warmer than average as we move through spring. But we'll also see humid conditions. So we're not talking heat wave type above average. It's more they will just be that little bit warmer due to the warm ocean influence. So that's the 3-month outlook. But over the weekend, a lot of people talking about this coming low pressure system. We've got a trough developing along the coast. This is going to bring some fairly widespread rainfall into New South Wales as we move through the weekend.
Thanks very much, Graham, for that excellent look at the 3-month weather forecast. It gives us a good idea of what's ahead of us and helps us to make decisions. With the weather in mind, we'll now move on to Sarah Giblin, Acting Team Leader for the Ag Extension team for Hunter Local Land Services, who's going to give us a look at the soil moisture network and how that helps with decision making. Sarah was born and raised in the Upper Hunter and cut her agronomy teeth in the northwestern cropping country. Sarah brings over 20 years experience and has been bringing her knowledge and experience to the Hunter for over 7 years now. Sarah is also working in her substantive role of Hunter, Extension and Advisory Officer for Sustainable Ag. Thanks, Sarah.
So here we have at the Merriwell Pasture demonstration site one of our soil moisture probes and full weather. This one has a full weather station that feeds into the Hunter Soil Moisture Network. The Hunter Soil Moisture Network's been a project now for a couple of years of establishing soil moisture probes and weather stations across our Hunter local land services area. Stage one of that has been the implementation of 9 probes in the upper Hunter, and some of those have a full weather station and some of those just have the probe and rain bucket that feeds information every 15 minutes to our Hunter Soil Moisture Network platform that you can access. We would not have been able to do this without cooperators and stakeholders such as landholder grower groups, Upper Hunter Sustainable Farmers Group, Singleton Beef and Land Management Association and corporate investors. Without this project, a partnership, strategic partnership, this wouldn't have been established, and it's only just the initial stages of it, and what's going to come from this is going to really help in the decision making in producers and agribusinesses and ag advisors to help you manage your risk and your farming system. Okay, so here we have the soil moisture probe. This up here is the rain bucket. It measures rainfall and is up every 15 minutes. It doesn't reset until 12 o'clock at night. The Bureau of Meteorology one sets at 9 o'clock in the morning, but this one resets at 12 o'clock at night. Then going on, we have the wind speed and direction and temperature, and in here we have our humidity, solar radiation and so forth. The information that we get from just this component here is shown on our platform, and it can help you with your decisions on, well, what is the temperature recorded, what has been my minimum and what has been my maximum for the area. But it also can help you if you're spraying. If you're out there spraying paddocks, and to know your delta T is part of a requirement. And if you're from around this area, or you know there's a probe in your area, you potentially can use the information off this to put down your delta T, just to see your droplet survival, potential drift risks and so forth when it comes to with spraying. From here we go, the probe is actually out in the active pasture. It's no good having it here where we're not growing any pasture, because it's going to give you a false reading of how much moisture is available to your pasture system. So it goes down to just over 1 metre, and we're measuring both soil moisture and soil temperature at 10 centimetre increments. And this gives us the importance of this information is to tell you with the soil temperature, well, when are my temperatures going to start, my winter pastures going to start being active, and when are they going to start not producing too much purely because of too hot or too cold. And it's same again with summer pastures. At what stage are they going to start firing up and putting on dry matter, vegetative growth, and at what stage is it too cold for those pastures to be active? And if you've got cattle in there and it's a tropical system, well then you know that, hang on a minute, there's not going to be too much new vegetative growth come out of that pasture system purely because of the soil temperature. It also helps you with indicators of when you should be sowing some of the tropical fodder crops that we have, summer fodder crops that we have, and also our winter fodder crops. Each of those pasture types has different limitations of when they can be sown, and the seed emergence, seedling survival rate as well. And with regards to the moisture, it shows you from the rainfall events that we get how effective we have been at putting that moisture into the ground, putting that moisture into our bucket or our fuel tank. And then you can see, well, have I got from that rainfall, have we got 1 foot of moisture, have I got 2 foot of moisture, and then understanding how much of that moisture is going to drive production up top, how much of that moisture is going to turn rainfall into dry matter. This system here, as you can see, it's quite big, bulky. it was using a lot of rain, a lot of moisture, and we did feel the profile, but purely because of the vegetative growth that we have here, it was really a lot of straws going into that bucket and pulling that moisture out. And what we're finding before last weekend's rainfall events is that there was only probably 30% of that moisture, of that profile's moisture available. And when we get down to those levels, yes, there is moisture there in that system, but the moisture, the plant would be realizing that and putting all their energy into growing roots to get to that moisture, rather than growing vegetative growth that turns into dry matter. Another thing these soil moisture probes will be able to help us do is measure our productivity. How well have these pastures performed? If we're weighing livestock on and livestock off a paddock, we can see how much rainfall we've used or moisture we've used to put those kilograms of livestock weight gain on. So it just helps us in benchmarking our performance of our pastures to work out when our pastures are highly productive and when they're not so productive. We all have a bit of an idea of that, but this gives us a bit of some figures that we can use to benchmark things. These probes, in showing us how much moisture we have underneath our pasture systems, they do it very effectively in our cropping systems, but we don't do it effective enough in our pasture systems. But when we're making that decision of putting cattle on there, and if you need to put another 100 kilos on that per animal on that, or 50 kilos, we can see how much dry matter we have in front of us, but we also know how much fuel we've got in the tank to get there. It saves the umming and ahhing. It helps us in our decision. You may be putting cattle on there to put on another 100 kilos or 50 kilos, but you may only have a third of a tank to get there. So it just gives you an idea of how much potential and how much ability that paddock there, or that pasture system, has about meeting what you require from it. So you can access this information from the soil moisture probes by visiting the Hunter Local Land Services website. Once you get to that Local Land Services website, on your right hand side of the screen there'll be a blue box and it will have programs and projects. Click on that tab, and then once you open up the next page, go to the left hand side of the screen, scroll down, and you'll see wording there that says Hunter Soil Moisture Project. Click on that, and then that'll take you through to the Hunter Soil Moisture Project page. It gives a bit of information at the top of it about what it all is, who have been our partners, and then scroll down from there and you'll see all the locations that we have. At the moment, we've only have 9 locations, but by the end of this financial year, we envisage that 9 will double as we are putting more probes into the Manning Great Lakes areas as we speak, and also in the Lower Hunter. If you require further information on the Hunter Soil Moisture Network, please do not hesitate to call one of our officers and ask to speak to someone from the Agricultural Extension team or myself, Sarah Giblin, and I'll be more than happy to provide you with some information about the Soil Moisture Network, whether it's been an interpretation of them or purely just how to access that information.
Hi, I hope now you have a better understanding of the Hunter Soil Moisture Network and what it involves. That footage was taken out at one of our Merriwell sites in the paddock so that you could actually see where it is positioned and how it sits within our Merriwell demonstration site. You will also notice from that video that the probes they are actually in an active pasture area that is actually being grazed. So it's similar to your paddocks, rather than being in a fenced off area where the pastures aren't active. As mentioned in that video, we currently have 9 soil moisture probes located in the Upper Hunter, but with one being located at Gloucester. This information is being live streamed every 15 minutes to our Hunter Local Land Services website platform. This year we hope to be having another 10 installed in the Manning Great Lakes area and in the Lower Hunter area to help you with your decision making. Please be mindful that these soil probes are all located on dryland pasture systems and have no effect from irrigation, so the rainfall that you receive is what is actually shown in those figures. So let's now have a look at those figures that when you log in to the Hunter Soil Moisture Network that you see. As you can see, this is the Maryville site that was just featured on that video. We can see a lot of information there on the actual temperature, current temperature that we're getting, the minimum and the maximums for the day, the wind, direction, speed and the average for the day, and the other atmospheric conditions such as solar radiation, humidity and our delta T's. As mentioned in the video also, the delta T is a tool that we can use for when we're spraying any type of herbicides, pesticides, that we can record on the atmospheric conditions for droplet survival and also how well that chemical is going to reach our target. Over here, we also have the rainfall, and that's giving us a rainfall total for that day. So purely because we haven't been receiving any rainfall in the Upper Hunter at the moment, that rain gauge doesn't have any rain reading in it. This chart here is telling us in 10 centimetre, 20 centimetre, 40 centimetre and 60 centimetre increments of how much moisture is in the profile in those sections. Overall in this Maryville site we have 23% of the moisture in that profile is available to produce dry matter of our pastures. This gauge, I would look at it as in a fuel tank or a bucket. How much moisture do you have left in your bucket compared to a year ago, which was hardly anything, to a month ago where we had we still were benefiting from those late summer rainfall rains. So currently what you're seeing is that we actually don't have too much rainfall moisture in our profile that is available for pastures, and that most of it is sitting in the top 10 centimetres and there's a little bit down at 15 centimetres, but at the 40 centimetre mark we actually don't have any moisture available for those plants. This red line here, if you do find that you do have moisture still there, that moisture in the physical soil moisture profile, it isn't available to produce dry matter. It's not accessible for your plant. And on this other side is saturation point when we'll start to see runoff. This is the current pasture growth at that Maryville site. As you can see here, we don't actually have a lot of dry matter available to the plants. To the cattle, this pasture system is mainly at the moment is of brassica type weeds, lucerne and annual ryegrasses. The landholder has actually destocked this paddock due to the fact that we didn't have any more moisture left in that profile, and he wanted to save his ground cover so that he could respond, his pastures could respond to any rainfall that was received. As you can see on this graph, as you scroll down the Hunter Soil Moisture Network page, you will see a soil moisture graph that shows us how much moisture that we have in that profile over a 12-month period. And underneath it, we'll see a rainfall chart. So we will see the reaction in our soil moisture from rainfall received. Last year, the soil profiles were very dry, purely because of seasonal conditions. And this is a very heavy clay, so it takes a lot to fill up. In February, we had a total of 178 mils of rain. And you can see the initial response from that rainfall in our soil moisture. Then in March, we had a further 70 mil, which topped up the soil moisture profile again, and then in April we had another 98 mil, which further topped up that profile. We haven't received too much rainfall since then, and purely because of the pasture growth, the rapid pasture growth that was occurring at that time, drew a lot of moisture out of that profile. We haven't seen too much effective rainfall since then, and since we've had another 31 mils in June, we're starting to see a spike. We're starting to see this soil moisture build back up again. But be mindful, there's only 23% of soil moisture left in that profile. This is also in relation to the fact that our evaporation isn't as high during the winter months as opposed to the summer months. And the evapotranspiration of our plants during this time isn't as high as what it would be during those summer months. As you can see from these arrows, this was the rainfall that we received and the response to rainfall in the soil moisture chart in those summer months. And this is what we're seeing in these in the June rainfall received. Another thing driving our soil moisture and our dry matter production is soil temperature, and this also can be seen on the soil moisture network and will be available to from those new soil moisture probes that are installed this year. As you can see here, those in the top 10 to 20 centimetres, how hot that summer was. We had soil temperatures up over 30 degrees in the top 10 centimetres, hence why we had such a fire season that we did. Then we got the rainfall. Rainfall received, cooled the soil temperatures and actually activated that high dry matter pasture growth that we had. Since then, we've started to see a decline in those soil temperatures in that top 10 to 20 centimetres fall down to below 15 degrees. So therefore, our pasture types during this period of time aren't the same as what they were during summer, and the growth is slowed, so the moisture used is also slowed too, purely as a reaction to pasture growth. I hope this has improved your understanding of the Hunter Soil Moisture Network and how it can benefit you in your decision making. I would encourage you to now go and have a look at the Bureau of Meteorology forecast for this weekend and for the seasonal condition, and look at how your soil moisture is and make the decision of what's underneath your soil. How much is left in your fuel tank to get you to where you need to be? And what are the chances of you getting those further top-up rains to potentially take that 23% of your soil moisture back up to 50 to 60% of soil moisture full? Then you can make your decisions on whether you have enough fuel in that tank to produce your dry matter required to get your cattle to where they need to be. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I know that you've put a lot of hard work into getting this project off the ground and up and running, so I'm sure that our listeners will have appreciated that look at how to utilise that data and read that data. Healthy soils and rainfall are key to the next part of our webinar presentations as we move to talking about pasture utilisation, rumen nutrition and supplementary feeding. Pasture assessment and utilisation are key to making sure that your livestock are meeting their nutritional requirements. We'll also hear from Tanya Hayes, Northeast and Hunter Territory Manager for SeedForce, on the role perennial grasses have to play in rotational grazing.
Hi, I'm Teresa Hogan, Livestock Officer for Hunter Local Land Services. I'm out in the paddock today to have a chat with you about meeting livestock nutritional requirements through pasture utilisation and how and when to make decisions on shifting into supplementary feeding. To kick things off, let's first look at the digestive system of the ruminant. This gives us a better understanding of what we're dealing with and also gives us a bit of insight into why it takes some time to master feeding our ruminants. The digestive system of the ruminant is made up of 4 stomachs, each with their role to play. We have the rumen, reticulum, omason and abomason. The rumen is the business zone and is changing constantly with feed and growth. This is where the food is broken down by microbes to produce energy for our livestock. Balancing the nutrient requirements of both rumen microorganisms and the animal itself is essential. Slight changes in feed can disrupt the rumen and cause significant production loss. This is why it is really important to always introduce new feeds slowly and never introduce a feed to a hungry animal. When introducing feed to the livestock, including putting them onto new pastures, ensure that you fill them up first with something like hay or straw so that they are not gorging themselves when they get onto that feed. The feed that we provide our livestock requires energy, protein, fibre, vitamins and minerals. Energy is required for maintenance, growth, pregnancy and lactation, and their protein requirements depend on their age and reproductive status. By way of example, pregnant animals' demand for energy from conception to late pregnancy will increase. When the calf or lamb is on the ground, during early lactation, we will see a peak in energy demand, then a plateau during mid-lactation, and then we will see a decrease in energy demand as the calf or lamb begins to feed itself during that late lactation period. If you do not meet the energy requirements of your pregnant and lactating animals, the animal will begin to draw nutrients from other parts of the body. This will cause a significant loss in production and a slip in condition, not only affecting the mother but the offspring as well. This highlights the importance of understanding the growth stage and reproductive status of your livestock. This will ensure that you can make effective management decisions quickly and on time to ensure that you are meeting those demands. Pasture assessment is the key to understanding whether you have enough feed in your paddock to meet the energy requirements of your livestock. The best way to undertake a pasture assessment is to jump out of your ute and get down on ground level and have a look what you actually have. We need to bear in mind that the grazing habits of our livestock differ. So where our cows will tend to be grazing in this area and taking in a lot more of this dry roughage, our sheep will be down at ground level and they will be looking for green pick and short shoots to eat. Once we know what livestock we want to put in the paddock, we then need to determine whether the digestibility of the feed available will meet those energy requirements. So it's really important to understand the types and varieties of grass and legumes that you've got growing. In February to March, this native pasture had some good rainfall. This saw some good summer grass growth. Once we hit those colder months in early June and we got our first frosts, these temperate grasses ceased growth and began to shut down, thus leaving us with this dry stand feed. And with continued rainfall throughout June, we got a growth of winter legumes. We have clover and we also have some trefoil in this paddock. It's important to understand what's happening down on a ground level because from above this paddock looks like it's got plenty of feed in it. But if we don't have this growth happening down here, there's actually very limited feed, with a lot of this grass only sitting around 7 megs of energy, which is not adequate feed. As part of our pasture assessment, we need to make sure that there is enough digestible matter in this pasture to meet those energy requirements. And there are a couple of different tools that we can use to make sure that we've got enough feed in the paddock. The first one is by taking a quadrant, so getting a 50 by 50 centimetre square, placing it down on an area that looks like it is a good representation of the pasture, and picking everything to ground level that's in that area. We then can pop that sample into a brown paper bag and put it in the microwave. We want to take all the moisture out of that feed to ensure that we can get an accurate reading on how much digestible matter is there. So, zapping it in the microwave on 10 to 15 second increments so that you don't burn your house down, you'll be able to dry that feed out. And the best way to determine whether it's dry is to weigh each 15 second period, weigh the sample, and then when you've had 2 in a row where the weight hasn't changed, you have pretty much removed all the water. You then can use the calculation that is now appearing on your screen and plug in those details to determine the digestible matter that is present on average in your paddock. This is an approximation, but it's better than nothing, and it'll give you a bit of a guide as to whether there'll be enough feed in that paddock. The other way you can do it is using an MLA pasture ruler. These are an excellent tool and can be ordered for free from MLA's website, which we will include in the after information for this webinar. All you need to do with your pasture ruler is just pop it into the pasture, and there's a measurement on the ruler that will give you an indication of the approximate amount of dry matter that's present in the paddock. By understanding the dry matter that's in your paddock, you will know whether there's going to be enough feed over the course of the use of that paddock to meet those energy requirements of those livestock. If in the case that there isn't enough feed available, you will need to make decisions around whether or not you want to move into some form of supplementary feeding, or whether you're going to move those cattle on or sheep on to a different pasture. In the case where you have no other alternative, or there is still dry feed standing in the paddock, This is a great time to consider your options of supplementary feeding to complement those dry stands of feed. As part of our pasture management decisions for livestock production, we want to make sure that our livestock are utilising the pasture as best as possible, particularly our dry stand feed. There are a lot of options on the market to improve pasture intake and digestibility. These include lick blocks and dry licks, molasses products, and grain or pellet supplementation. It's a matter of understanding what will work best for you, but it's also a matter of understanding exactly what you need. There is no hard and fast rules about what you will need for your specific pasture because it can differ greatly from one person to the next, depending on their ability to feed out the product, but also on the requirements of their livestock depending on their growth or reproductive status or inherent deficiencies that are present in that paddock. So do your homework. Make sure you've asked around and had a look at all your options before making a decision on what you get. It could save you a lot of money down the track. If you have to move to some form of supplementation feeding, be that to improve pasture utilisation or to meet a feed gap, it is important that you make your decisions early. Make sure that you have enough feed on hand to move into a feeding situation so that you can feed that feed slowly. But you can also make sure that you're not having quick feed changes because you couldn't get the product that you wanted. We found during the drought that feed became quite hard to get, and that hasn't changed now. We need to be aware that we want to have enough feed on hand to get our livestock through that feed gap if we're not going to have pastures coming away till the spring.
Hi, my name's Tanya Hayes. I'm a Territory Business Manager with SeedForce. I cover off the north of New South Wales from Sydney to Queensland border, and today I'll be talking about perennial grasses, specifically looking at tall fescue and cocksfoot grasses. When you're looking at the perennial grasses, in particular looking at ryegrass compared to cocksfoot or tall fescue, cocksfoot really fits into those areas that, you know, are big acidic soil areas. They're not waterlogging areas, but pretty good fertility in regards to the pH level, around 5.5 to 7.5. Something that's going to be fairly dry land, not irrigated. Something that you're going to want a good longevity with, something that's going to have deep root structures rather than shallow root structures, and something that's actually going to give you a good feed value with good protein levels in it. The differences between the growth patterns in regards to cocksfoot and tall fescue and annual or perennial ryegrasses is that the perennial ryegrasses are really fast to establish. They can kick off really quickly in the autumn months and provide really good feed value during those cooler months, those autumn winter months, as well as early into the spring as well. Whereas cocksfoot, they're slow to establish. They're one of the slowest grasses to establish, but what that does in turn, it allows it to establish really well, create a really good root structure deep down in the soil, which allows it to get into that subsoil moisture compared to the ryegrasses, which have very shallow root structures. And then what you're going to find is as they're coming into those warmer months in the late spring, early summer, where the ryegrasses tend to sort of shut off and start sort of not dying back, but it's like slowing down in their production, the cocksfoot is going to really ramp it up, and they're actually going to create high quality feed and not have to deal with any really pests or diseases or anything like that. And they're going to continue on through to the warmer months to provide excellent feed value for you throughout the rest of the warmer months, whereas the ryegrasses won't continue on. Okay, looking at the modern day fescues and cocksfoots compared to the old days, they really had a bad reputation of being coarse, unpalatable, hard to manage. But nowadays, with the new ones that are out here, with a bit of fertility and looking after them and grazing management, you'll find that you'll get a stand that'll give you up to 20 years worth of life. Fescue, when you're looking at it, it's an amazing product, and it's been given a bad rap. That has a lot of benefits when it looking at the waterlogging abilities of it. It's available to withstand that and deal with the lack of oxygen down in the roots. Its ability to withstand the heat, which is going to give you more summer persistence with it, like the cocksfoot does with that deep root structure of up to 2 meters. It's got a wide range of soils and pH levels that you can put it into. It's frost tolerant as well, so the fescues are really unutilised pasture grass as far as I'm concerned. Yes, you do have to manage its grazing, especially in spring when it's starting to really flourish. You really need to close that rotation gap to around about 14 days compared to ryegrass, which can be about 21 days. But at the end of the day, you're going to get that long-term persistence with the fescue like you would with the cocksfoot, especially in those warmer months.
Pasture assessment and knowing what's in your paddock are key to ensuring that you can meet the nutritional requirements of your livestock. We are fortunate today to have Nikki Henderson with us, livestock nutritionist for Pinnacle Ag, to talk to us further about rumen nutrition and what is required in decision making around supplementary feeding. Nikki has more than 8 years' experience in livestock nutrition and animal health right across Eastern Australia. Nikki's passion for improving livestock performance through understanding the intricacies of rumen fermentation and how that translates into meeting livestock requirements. By utilising the latest research, she matches pasture and crop nutritional values to be the most efficient livestock management systems for your business. Nikki aims to bridge the gap in achieving your livestock's full genetic potential.
Good morning, everyone. Nikki Henderson's my name. I'm a livestock nutritionist. So today I'm going to cover off on just a summary of stock nutritional requirements and then discuss, some of our feed options at the moment, whether our feed will suffice, whether we need to supplementary feed, and just a little bit of a discussion around, what feeds are available and what might be best suited. So what's ahead? At the moment, we're off the back of an amazing autumn start with an abundance of rain, which was very, very needed after a few years of drought. But we're finding a lot of our summer pastures with a few frosts we've had, are definitely losing digestibility and quite frosted. We're heading into lambing and calving with the next few months, and then perhaps planning to join some heifers in spring. So feed quality going forward, like I mentioned, a lot of these summer grasses are frosted. They're going to be losing digestibility, losing quality pretty quickly. And a lot of our production or potential production comes from what winter feed is coming underneath. So our legumes, our grasses, those winter active species, and how much are there, what sort of quantity and what the stock can access as well. Some of you guys might have cereal crops and fodder crops you put in for winter, so I'll discuss some of those as well. But to understand the paddock feed, you've got, just a little bit of thought around what's actively growing, how much is there, and how much can our stock access. So looking at stock requirements, when we talk about our cattle, from dry through to about 7 months of pregnancy, their requirements don't jump up substantially. So they tick along sort of a little bit above maintenance. Keep in mind, I've just made some assumptions around how much energy is used for activity, depending on what your country's like and how hilly it is. So these are just, ballpark figures, but it demonstrates with the same class of stock, so a 500 kilo cow, how much her requirements for energy jump up as she gets to the point of calving, and then of course into peak lactation where we see that really big demand. And that's where, we need to plan ahead a little bit with our paddock feed to make sure, we've got enough feed there to meet her requirements with energy and protein post calving, because otherwise we're going to start to see some drawdown in body condition. And I realise a lot of the stock at the moment are a pretty good condition. Not everyone's stock are fat, but in saying that, most times our stock are in much better condition this year than what they were last year. It's just, we need to be aware, how much fertility is impacted by a change in body condition score. So this slide here goes through the impact of dropping in body condition score throughout that calving period. So on the left-hand side, we've got the postpartum and estrus interval. So the days in which from when the cow's calved to when she's going to cycle and potentially get back into calf. For her to maintain an annual calving the same time, she needs to get back into calf within about 84 days of calving to maintain that window. So, you know, we want to make sure we're making the best of this season with all this feed we've had, that we are maintaining good body condition and can try and tighten up our joining for next year's calving. So if you look along the bottom, we've got condition scores from 0 to 5. So most times we're targeting sort of that 3 body condition score as a not fat animal, but a healthy, strong animal that's got sufficient condition to push out that calf and lactate appropriately. If we look at the line, so condition score 3, if she's on good feed post-calving, you know, her potential to cycle and get back into calf is fantastic. You know, she potentially could get back into calf 40 to 50 days after she's calved. But if she goes onto poor feed, so if her feed quality or quantity declines immediately after that calving period, you know, we jump up substantially. 60 days it might take her to cycle, which is still fine to maintain our annual calving. The problem I want to highlight is if she's 3 body condition score and then drops quite substantially because she starts to milk off her back to support lactation, and she gets closer to that 2 or 2.5, you know, that's when we do start to head into that window where we're really extending our calving period. And this is particularly important when we're looking at our first calved heifers that still have further growth. You know, we really want to make sure they're losing minimal weight through this calving period. So we're doing everything we can to get them back into calf as quickly as we can. So now just want to talk about some different paddock feeds and then run through some different scenarios around what we may need to feed at these times. So this is a picture of just some dry standing feed. I apologise, it's probably, you know, it's not liver seed grass, it's not, you know, exactly what you guys may have in the paddock, but it gives us an idea of, you know, something like this is a good bulk of dry standing feed. We don't have much green or any green feed other than a few thistles coming through. So when you think about, you know, requirements for stock, when I look at this feed, it's going to be suitable for that early pregnant or perhaps single bearing ewe early on. But as we get closer to the production end where they're about to calve or lamb, you know, we need to make sure we're adding in some additional energy and protein to meet their requirements, depending on what stock are running on this feed. So, you know, when we're looking at kind of lower requirements like our earlier pregnant animals or, you know, our single bearing ewes, you know, this kind of feed with a urea supplement, something with some protein and energy in there would suffice to help them digest more of this feed. Do need to be mindful of high urea supplements if they're starting to lamb or calve, just because that can be counterproductive at that stage. If we're needing to increase the energy and the protein with this feed, you know, things like meals, so soybean meal, cottonseed meal are definitely, or canola meal, are definitely great sources of protein and good sources of energy as well. It just means we need a lot more infrastructure if we're looking at feeding those on dry feed, troughing, something like that, where cottonseed might be a good option because you can just put it on the ground and that will provide some protein and some energy. If you are looking at buying feed in to meet protein or additional energy, it's really worthwhile comparing these feeds back to a cost per kilogram of protein or cost per megajoule of energy. So this slide here, I've just put in some basic feeds that I know are available at the moment. Put in the amount of protein. So these pellets at the top are 16% protein, cottonseeds 22%, and so forth, DDG down the bottom at 22 as well. And then put the dry matter percentage in. So this is really important because we need to compare feeds on an even playing field. So to incorporate the dry matter percentage and then calculate that out based on the cost per tonne, we can start to compare some of these feeds. And look, you look at the DDG, which you'd assume would be the cheapest and the most cost effective. But because it's less in protein than what soybean meal is, we're having to feed more of that to get the same amount of protein. So your meals do come out a lot more cost effective. With energy, I've done the same thing just to compare some different feed sources. So, it's very important if you're looking at hay or silage, because the megajoules of energy do differ dramatically depending on the condition and the time in which that crop's been harvested. It's worthwhile getting a feed test if you're looking at purchasing feed, so you are comparing it with actual numbers rather than estimated figures. So just to touch on silage, silage is one just to be mindful of, because there's a lot of it around at the moment. It can be a great feed source for energy and protein, depending on what feed type. It's very low or much lower in dry matter compared to hay. So baled silage is usually about 50% dry matter. So if you think of, baled silage being $200 a tonne, you've got to keep in mind that half of what you're buying is water. So this is why it's important to compare these feeds on a dry matter basis. Just got a picture here with some forage crops. So these stock grazing a cereal, and look, cereal crops are really high in energy, high in protein. They do lack roughage, particularly during that early growth period, and it depends on what class of stock that we've got grazing on them as to whether we need to provide additional roughage. So look, it's a good idea to supplement with some straw cereal hay during that adaptation phase, particularly for cattle that have a higher requirement for functional fibre in their diet. But outside of that, I think a lot of the best supplementation decisions with cereal crops are around use of minerals, just because this type of feed, yes, it's high in energy and protein, but a lot of your protein is in the form of nitrogen. And there's only so much nitrogen the rumen bacteria can utilise without having a carbohydrate source in there. So, your mineral licks or even feeding grain, depending on what you're wanting to achieve, somehow if we can increase the carbohydrate in the diet, and then of course, focusing on some of the key minerals that are missing in this feed in early growth. The next slide, we'll go through that in a little bit more depth. So it's more suited for growing stock because of the high energy and protein or lactation diets. It can be managed for pre-lambing, pre-calving, and definitely can be a good feed. It's just because of that high nitrogen and some of the mineral ratios, we do need to manage that diet if we're looking at calving or lambing on this kind of feed. Ideally, avoid calving heifers on crop, just because of some of the mineral interactions cause issues with muscle function, and of course, it's a very punchy feed, so we don't want to put too much extra birth weight into the calf, which can be an issue on this kind of feed. And the same with single bearing ewes potentially, just because of the overload of energy. So mineral levels in feed, this is just a good graph that sort of summarises what a lot of the issues we see in rich green feed. So your fodder crops and a lot of early growth feeds are really quite high in potassium, so being K, so really high during that early growth. And the problem with that, it's antagonistic to magnesium and even sodium. So depending on what we're trying to achieve, it's limiting already in the feed. Magnesium, you can see that bottom line, it's not in there in a sufficient amount. And then we've got a really high level of potassium that's blocking further absorption of that feed. So some of the mineral interactions can cause substantial issues if we're looking at animals that are about to calve or are lactating, because magnesium plays a major role in their system for muscle function, rumen contraction, everything to do with calving or lambing. They need muscle strength to push. And of course, if they're not as strong and don't have that strong muscle contraction, we're going to have longer birth times, increased risk of mortality, with sheep, with twin lambs particularly. And of course, on the lactation side of things, we need sufficient magnesium and calcium to support milk production. So, when I'm looking at these cereal crops, it's well worth supplementing with a mineral that will be suitable to their demands at that stage. So magnesium, it is really important. You know, looking at this, it's used for 300 biochemical reactions in the body. You know, it plays a major role in their system, and a lot of that, you know, comes back to nerve function and muscle contraction. You can see the steer in this picture. He was on ryegrass and had sufficient roughage in the paddock for the areas that weren't sown, but it highlights, even without legumes, we can get some bloat issues with high protein and high potassium feed because of, you know, that lack of magnesium for rumen contraction. Looking at supplementing, so, you know, on a really basic level, using equal parts of Mag, salt and lime will suffice their magnesium, sodium and calcium requirements. It just depends on, you know, what class of stock. So, you know, if we've got twin ewes about to lamb on crop or heifers, it's definitely not going to be the right form of magnesium to overcome all that high potassium. And look, there's some really great products on the market that have chelated magnesium, chelated minerals in there, you know, on a starch base. So they really help with production on these high protein, high nitrate feeds. So, you know, horses for courses, if you've got a native mixed pasture that does have green feed, that's not super rich, they're single bearing ewes and they're mature, it's not lambing for the first time, yes, you know, something like that, your Mag, salt and lime will suffice. But if they're, you know, twin bearing ewes on crop or maidens, you know, any sort of challenge, it's well worth looking at these specifically formulated mineral products because they work a lot better, and stock prices at the moment, you know, you do have to weigh up your return on your investment and the fact that they're worth a lot more. You know, if you can save a few more lambs, it may be worthwhile spending a little bit more on your mineral supplementation. So now just want to touch on heifer management, where, you know, a lot of you guys would have sold off a lot of cows through the drought and kept some more young stock. So I think we want to make some plans now to try and get every heifer we can in calf and set her up to have a successful calving for next year. So when we talk about heifer selection, you know, there's some basic things that I just wanted to draw your attention to. So structural correctness, we want to make sure we're looking at our heifers and assessing, yes, if they're heavy enough, but make sure, you know, they've got the right temperament. They've got, you know, good feet that they're not going to start to break down or breed that issue into your herd. And then, of course, you know, look at her physical structure. If she's got high pin bones and narrow hips, the chances of her having calving issues start to get, you know, pretty high. So it's a good idea to look at your heifers. Obviously, try and get them as heavy as you can, but do look at some of those other factors and make sure, you know, you're making smart decisions with your bull selection as well. You know, set a breed objective. Make sure you're hitting those targets and you're selecting animals, both bulls to breed from and heifers to breed with, that are creating an animal that, you know, you're wanting to present. So let's talk about weight, because that's definitely, you know, something at the moment is very, very important. And we've got a window now where we can push them along a little bit more to try and get a few more into that a bit heavier weight. So when we talk about heifer management, we need to set critical mating weight. So this is the weight at the start of the joining period where we're going to get at least 80% or 85% of those heifers in calf in a reasonably short joining period. So for us to have a successful calving, we need to have those animals about 65% of their standard reference weight. So 65% of their potential mature weight. And then we sort of map out a plan to achieve that. So, you know, they might be 250 kilos. We might need them to get to 320 kilos in a few months' time. You know, do we have crop for them to go on to? Will they do a kilo a day, or do we need to supplement a little bit of a lick or grain to push them along? Because the difference between them getting to 300 kilos when they should be 360, you know, they might cycle, but the problem is we're getting an animal to conceive at a lighter birth weight. She's not as physically mature. And there's so much research around if we can push them along and have better physical maturity at joining, we don't need substantial weight gain during that pregnancy time. And that's when you can start to have issues with calf birth weight and really compromise your heifer's maturity, her physical growth as well. So again, just looking at our heifers, I've got a scenario here based on a 550 kilo cow as our standard reference weight. So that just refers to a dry cow in condition score 3. So not a fat animal, but a healthy animal. What is our current weight? Like I said, do we need to supplementary feed, or do we need to change her diet around, putting her onto some crop to push her along? And then, for that 550 kilo animal, you are looking at that 360 kilo target joining weight, which is a lot higher than what a lot of people would normally work towards. But like I said, the heavier we can get them pre-joining, the much more successful calving and managing that pregnant heifer will be. So Youngstock requirements, just wanted to touch on, if we need her to do 500 grams of daily weight gain or a kilo, this is what it looks like in comparison to her maintenance requirements. So, a lot of the time we're feeding a fair bit just to maintain her weight. So to add a little bit more in, whether it's paddock feed or a little bit of supplementary feed, can make a big difference in getting them to their target weight sooner. So if you want to know more, if you've got any specific scenarios you'd like me to work through, please just get in touch with myself, definitely, through this area fairly regularly. So thank you very much to the LLS, and look forward to hearing from anyone that may have any questions.
Thank you for that, Nikki. That was a great look at the importance of maintaining livestock condition to ensure that we are optimising fertility and production. It just goes to show the importance of knowing what's in your paddock and making decisions early. That concludes this part of our webinar. We are now going to move to a discussion panel, and we are joined by Sarah and Nikki, as well as David Dean, our Pastures Officer for Hunter Local Land Services, to discuss the webinar and put some questions that have been posed by our audience to them for discussion. Welcome, everybody. To kick things off,
Hi, Teresa.
I'll head over to Sarah. You've spoken to us about the Soil Moisture Network and what an excellent project that is, and I'm sure our viewers will agree that it's going to be very useful. But do you have any advice for somebody just starting out on how to incorporate that data into their management decisions?
My advice for someone just starting out is to get on the site and locate, see if some of those probes are near where they're situated, where their farm is at, and just understand the relationship between rainfall and how it is that rainfall is infiltrated into the soil moisture profile and is available. So basically, what rainfall events and how the rain falls puts moisture into their bucket, their profile, and what pastures they have there to use that moisture. So whether it's a summer dominant pasture or whether it's a winter dominant pasture, understand that what is the most productive time that your pastures require that moisture. So if you have some temperate pastures at the moment, as Tanya just alluded to, spoke about in the webinar, they're really going to start to fire up now. So we need to look at making sure that we're trying to get that bucket full. And it's really good to hear that Graham's saying that potentially we will start to see a little bit more rainfall for the next 3 months, which is really encouraging. And because our pasture system is going to need it. With our soil temperatures increasing and daylight hours increasing, so that's going to really drive those pastures. And for pasture growth, we need moisture underneath those plants, but we also need soil nutrition and plant nutrition. So also I'd encourage young people starting out to just make sure that their soil nutrition and also so therefore their plant is adequate for their plant nutrition to get the most value out of that soil moisture.
Thanks for that, Sarah. While I've got you, you mentioned that the soil probes were located in dry stand pastures. Can you just comment, do we have any located in paddocks with improved pastures?
Yes, the one that we saw on the webinar today, it is in approved pasture system. There is some that is they've been installed into a native unimproved pasture system, and there's some that are installed in native improved pasture systems and also improved pasture systems. So we have quite an array of pastures. Obviously on the Menning Great Lakes area, we're probably going to be more so into the improved pasture systems, but eventually on that Hunter Soil Moisture website or platform, there will be a site description there of what pasture type is there and what is the soil characteristics too, and the classification. So obviously our heavy soils can hold a lot more moisture than what some of our lighter soils can hold.
So for people who don't necessarily live close to one of the probes that you already have in, or one of the ones you have proposed, what do you suggest they do? Do they contact LLS to ask advice on which probe best will give them the best information? And do they incorporate the weather reading into that to better understand it for their own management systems?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Teresa. Definitely to give the Hunter LLS Ag team a call and just to discuss potentially what soil actually where some of the probes are located, what suits their system, and have a discussion about what pastures are on their property, and let's look at that rainfall and see potentially how much moisture we've got in the ground. So I'd encourage them to give us a call, and we can talk about how to use that information that is displayed on that soil moisture network, also rainfall received at their site, and then also help them understand what the Bureau of Meteorology are predicting, and just work out help them make their decisions going forward.
Thanks for that, Sarah. That was a really good look. Your presentation was fantastic, and it gave us a good understanding of how that data can be used in our own systems. And it also just highlighted the amount of work that you and your team have put into getting this project up and running, and how much work is ahead getting those 10 more probes in the next few months, and hopefully they incite a bit of rain across the region. Moving on now, I've got a question for David. We've heard from Tanya, David, about the use of perennial grasses in rotational systems. Can you tell us a little bit about the Singleton demonstration site where we filmed Tanya, and tell me how we can incorporate the information that we're getting out of the Singleton pasture demonstration site into our own management?
Thanks, Teresa. That was a very good video from Tanya discussing the perennial pastures, and which can be used as a really good foundation for a long-term good pasture, and be able to put that into your pasture management systems. With those perennial pastures, they can be used in a dryland or an irrigated system. At the Singleton site, we've got about 5 different types of perennial pastures. As Tanya was discussing, they come into their own about late spring, early summer. So they're a little bit slow to start off at the moment, but they're still growing very well. The site at Singleton is going really, really well. Everything's just been grazed off and been fertilised. We were hoping for another field day in about 5 weeks' time, but at this stage, because of the COVID-19 situation, we will do another series of short videos and get some guest speakers in and do some data analysis there as well. So in the Singleton site, we have about 140 different species of pasture types. The annuals and perennials, to look at everything growing in the one same situation and give you a very good indication of what goes well in the local area. Thanks.
Thanks for that, David. So the Singleton site itself has been a project that we've been doing in conjunction with other members of the Singleton pasture world. So it's a really good place to learn about all the different varieties that are available, and how that can be utilised for you in making your management decisions. So keep an eye out for those videos that David's putting together. They are on our YouTube platform and also available on Facebook. Nikki, while we've got you, I just wanted to have a quick chat with you about minerals and the use of minerals in our management decisions around feeding off our pastures. Would you suggest that when we're feeding out our minerals, is it best to use a lick block situation or put together a loose lick for them to eat?
Thanks, Teresa. So I think the reason for going to a block versus a lick kind of depends on what specific minerals we're chasing. So, let's talk magnesium, for example, and looking at a block, we've got things in there that will interfere with the animal's ability to absorb magnesium. So molasses is really high in potassium, and salt and calcium often are antagonistic to magnesium. And you think about physically making a block, all of those things are needed in some level. They're usually high in molasses or salt to physically bind that. So, if we're chasing magnesium on green feed, I'd be looking at, a loose lick. But say on dry feed, I think blocks can be a great easy option because, those elements, molasses is a good energy source. Salt is required to improve water, consumption at that time. So, blocks definitely have a good fit on dry feed. But one would suggest when you're looking at either blocks or licks is just look at, what's actually in there. Don't chase something if there's high levels of urea and you don't need it at that point, or, just, I suppose, make the decision by working out what minerals you're looking at and then what else is in there and try and pick something that's most suitable that way.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Can you also comment on the use of urea and how somebody possibly starting out with urea should start to incorporate that into their system to improve that intake, and just touch on the issues that we can see with urea supplementation and how best to alleviate them?
Yeah, sure. So if you're starting out using urea for the first time, make sure, we don't have much green feed there at all, because the urea in that supplement is going to replace what the green feed will do. So you don't want to be adding green when you don't need it. I think a safe and easy way is to look at a block, because the animal can't physically eat that much of it. It's going to definitely slow them down. Urea rates, I think in our kind of southern environment compared to, Queensland and those northern areas, I'd be capping you out at the rate of urea in your supplement at about 10%. Reason being, for that animal to utilise that nitrogen and get a good response from it, we're relying on a reasonable amount of rumen microbes to utilise that and help process that feed. So if we're not putting urea out with an additional carbohydrate or sugar source, excess urea gets absorbed to the bloodstream, can be toxic, puts a fair bit of pressure on their liver to excrete that excess nitrogen. So there's no point in giving more than what they need, because it can be counterproductive. And of course, with the weather at the moment, it's worthwhile, if you're using a loose lick or a block and we've got rain around, just be very wary that urea can be toxic, particularly if we get rain on a block or a lick. That urea, the nitrogen will absorb into that water, and if an animal licks that, it can be toxic. So make sure, your loose licks in tubs have slots in the side so the water can escape, and then your blocks, if they're starting to, lick them in a way that they can puddle the water, that you are checking and turning them over so it's not trapping water and potentially causing that risk.
That's very good advice. It's certainly very important to keep the weather off anything with urea in it for the safety of your animals and keeping them as healthy as possible. So when we talk about dry pastures as opposed to green pastures, Nikki, do we need to make sure, you did mention that we do need to consider minerals when we're on our green pasture, but we do often find that people will tend to avoid putting anything out with those green pastures. Can you just talk us through again, that the need for minerals in our green pastures?
Yeah, sure. So, the need for minerals really comes back to I suppose the type of minerals that are really high in the green feed, particularly in early growth. So high potassium is something that's usually in there in excess. And then, of course, really actively growing feed is really diluted for magnesium, calcium, can be sodium, depending on your country. And then, of course, your trace minerals, zinc and copper and selenium, So I suppose often when we've got green feed, we're heading to that production end for our stock where they're about to lamb and calve. So you've kind of got that double deficiency potential essentially, where the feed's lacking those nutrients and their requirements for, say, magnesium and calcium are substantially increasing during that period as well. So, it's well worth looking at using a supplement and just making sure it suits, like I said, if it's heifers, calving or twins, those higher risk, higher production animals, that we're using better forms of magnesium. But you will get a difference, in your pasture utilisation as well, with some of those licks that have a carbohydrate or sugar source, or same with your molasses in there for your blocks. You'll get other benefits at that time, and it's a case of topping up their mineral levels in advance or meeting their requirements, so we're not running into deficiencies or subclinical levels of deficiency where we're losing production.
Thanks for that. I'll throw this one out to Sarah or anyone else in the group who wants to answer it. When we are looking at our pasture, if we have top dressed with a fertiliser, do we still need to be supplementing our animals, or will that pasture have enough in it to meet the needs of our livestock?
I might start and then maybe Nikki can fill in. Obviously, I'm not a livestock specialist, but look, if we do top dress our pasture, obviously we're going to have healthier pastures. So therefore our ME is going to be a lot higher. Like we're potentially having that pasture at its best nutritive value that it can be. So it also depends on that pasture too. Different pastures, they only are capable of reaching certain ME values, a legume compared to a grass pasture, so ME and also protein. So it all depends on what type of pasture it is, but by adding fertiliser or top dressing and making those pastures to be the best, most productive they can be, you're probably reducing the amount of any extra additive minerals that you may need to add on. So I'm happy for Nikki or David to answer the rest of the question from an animal perspective.
Nikki be better at answering this.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Yeah, so I completely agree. Look, it's well worthwhile using fertilisers and pushing along your pastures, because it'll, obviously grow extra dry matter and increase the quality. The only thing we need to watch is, excessive amounts of urea or putting out urea at different times obviously increases the nitrogen component in the feed. So just watching those windows. Look, I like to sort of allow post-urea application at least 21 days, and hopefully we've had a decent rain event, at the start of that period, just to make sure the plant has absorbed that nitrogen, utilised it, and started to, spread it through the plant and decrease that risk for the animals. So that's the only, I suppose, warning sign or thing I would watch, is if you're, putting out a lot of urea and then got calving animals or lambing animals going onto that feed, it will exacerbate those nitrate levels for a short period. But it is beneficial for the plant growth ongoing. We've just got to watch that window.
And Teresa, can I just add in there? Sorry, if landholders are concerned about nitrates within their pastures and or any silage or feed, please contact us at the local land services. Our veterinary team they've got some nitrate sticks that they're able to just make a little bit of an assessment to tell you whether those nitrates within those pastures are going to be high, and whether your livestock are at risk. And we do have the potential to send some of those feeds, those silage feeds or hay feeds, away to get tested for those high nitrate levels.
Thanks, Sarah. I think that's a good segue into a question we've had come in just regarding, Nikki, I think you just mentioned that waiting 21 days. Is that the case if you're top dressing with straight nitrogen or urea?
Yeah. I realise it's longer than what most people would work on, but I think it's worthwhile, and it definitely avoids a lot of issues if you can allow time for that nitrogen to be absorbed and utilised. Again, depends on class of stock, and I completely agree around nitrate testing. I've got a SAP nitrate meter as well, so it's something we can get levels to, I suppose, preempt if there's going to be an issue. But yeah, I like to at least leave it 21 days post to nitrogen application.
Well, I've got one more question here, and I'll probably throw this one to Nikki as well. We seem to have worked you pretty hard at the discussion panel, but when we're choosing our supplementary feeds that we want to put out, one of the things we found during the drought was that when we were buying in our supplementary feeds, they weren't necessarily what we thought we were getting, and our quality wasn't necessarily there. And we were also dealing with some unusual supplementary feed options. What's your best advice for somebody who is buying in something and, you know, to make sure that they are getting the right quality and it is what they expect it to be? And for somebody who's just starting out, that can be quite daunting. So what advice would you have for them?
Great question. So I would definitely looking at getting a feed test done, and particularly if you're buying in a commodity, you know, make sure it's a feed test on the feed you're actually buying. Often I see feed tests will be done at the start of the season with a particular commodity, and then they just, you know, assume it's the same all the way through. So I think, yeah, getting a feed test done and then speaking with an advisor or the LOS as well, just someone that can help talk you through how to calculate that back to either a cost per megajoule of energy or cost per kilogram of protein, and then to other feed sources, because obviously if you're buying feed in, we need to compare other things as well to make sure it is the most cost effective option and suitable for your class of stock as well. You know, an example of something is grape mark, you know, is used a lot through the drought and is high in copper and tannin. So, you know, sometimes you're looking at a feed purely based on its energy or protein, and it might be suitable, but there might be something else in there that can be either toxic at high levels or not suitable for your class of stock. So just, yeah, do some research, talk to a few different people and get, you know, some educated.
Thanks, Nikki. I think that's a good place for us to finish up with. Look, if you have any more questions about any of the presentations you've seen today or any of the discussion we've just had in our discussion panel, please feel free to get in touch with local land services, and we will endeavour to make sure that those questions are answered. And just remember that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on our Hunter Local Land Services website, as well as our YouTube channel as soon as it's available. Thank you again to our presenters. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, David, for joining us for a discussion about a pretty important topic of pasture utilisation and supplementary feeding. I think we've learned a lot about the soil moisture network that we may not have known before and how we can use that. And we've also got down out in the paddock and had a look at our pastures and making a pasture assessment to make sure that we're making the best decisions for our livestock so that their condition aren't slipping and that our fertility and production is maintained and optimised. So thank you again to our panel and our presenters. It's been a very, very informative session today, and I really appreciate the time that you've taken to join us. To finish things off, I just want to let you all know that our fourth and final webinar for the Livestock Forum for 2020 will be with our vet team in 2 weeks' time on the 7th of August at the same time. And our vets will be looking at current health concerns and things for you to be aware of as we start heading into spring again, hopefully a wet spring. So if you want to tune in on the 7th of August at 9 a.m, please do so. And if you have any questions that you'd like answered on that webinar, please get in touch with Local Land Services and we'll endeavour to make sure that our vets are available to get those questions answered for you. There's no need to register again for that final webinar. If you've already registered, the link will be sent to you the day before the webinar that you can just join on whichever platform suits you. So if you're watching this as a rerun on our platforms, please use the link on our Facebook page to register yourself for the next webinar. And if we miss any, as I mentioned, it's being recorded, and these webinars will be available again for you down the track. Keep an eye out on our Facebook for updates and videos, more detail about the upcoming webinar and other presentations, as we have changed our way of presenting our information to you with the inability to do face-to-face meetings with you at the moment. A lot of our content is now online and in this format, so please keep an eye out on that. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, as I've mentioned. And also, if you have any questions about drought and drought recovery, please jump onto the Drought Hub. That is the place where you will find everything from our drought maps to forms for subsidies that are still available. So please jump on there for any further information relating to drought. And if you have any further questions, make sure you get in touch with us. Thank you again for joining us. This has been an excellent session and very informative, and I've really enjoyed myself presenting it for you. And I'd just like to finish off by reminding you all that you and your family are your farm's #1 asset, so please take care and stay safe. Thank you.